Hi everyone, my name is Suzanne and I'm a Chinese metaphysics master in Hong Kong. Now, last week we discussed the 10 gods and their representations when it comes to the environment, specific locations and venues, because that helps us identify where a particular interaction can take place, yeah, when there's a clash or a combination or a destruction and so on. Now, the 10 gods also have a representation when it comes to items and objects. Yeah, a lot of times, we can check a chart to see what sort of objects or clashes are affected, what sort of objects or items, pardon me, are affected by a clash or a harm or destruction or a combination for that matter. So, a clash can affect your, let's say, your family home, or it could affect um, your your the items that you use for your job, or they could affect your bonds, your stocks, right? So whenever a clash happens, we don't just want to know where it could happen or what environment is being affected, but also what item, what object we really need to be more careful with or we need to take into consideration, right? So this is when this particular analysis comes in, and each one of the 10 gods represents different types or different categories of items and objects. Now, again, you do need to know your natal chart for this first. You can go to this link here. I'll also post a link in the description to the video. And then whenever you go through a clash here, you can check what sort of, whether the clash actually happens to you, whether it affects you, and what objects or items may be affected. Or, a harm year, a destruction year, a self-punishment or a bullying punishment year, and so on. So in this particular chart, right now, obviously, we're in a snake year, and this person has a pig in the chart. So the pig clashes with the snake. So you need to check what is inside the pig. Inside the pig, the main qi, so the one that is written bigger, all of these, the ones in the center are the main qi. We're not really concerned with the sub qi, so only the main qi. Check what 10 god this is. So this is indirect resource, right? So a clash this year with the pig may impact all the items or objects that are associated with indirect resource, right? Now, when the person goes through a pig year, then the objects and items that are represented by the eating god can be affected or there may be an impact. When this person goes through a monkey year, then here again, whatever is represented by the friend god, by the friend element, can be affected and so on. Again, this is not just for clashes, but it's also for destructions, combinations, and so on. Whenever we go through a combination, it's usually something good. So maybe you make something extra. You get an extra item or object, but with a clash, a destruction, it may be taken away from you, or there may be some difficulties and some problems. So that's how we look at this. Now, what do the 10 gods actually represent? So direct wealth, the items and objects that are represented by direct wealth have to do with money. Yeah, so it's in the most straightforward form, it's cash, your cash flow, bonds, assets, your salary. Yeah, so if you have a clash in a month pillar, for example, you're an employee, you've got a clash in a month pillar, and the main C is direct wealth, then your salary may be affected. So either you lose the job, in which case definitely there's an effect to your salary, like you're losing salary. But if you proactively look for a new job, may still affect your salary. You may actually find a new job with a higher salary, right? So this is how you need to look at this. But then also it could indicate that there may be, so direct wealth also represents your family home. Yeah, so your actual home, your flat, whether you own it or not, doesn't matter. Rental or ownership doesn't matter. So there could be something happening to your family home. So maybe it needs a repair or renovation, or maybe you add a new home, yeah, a bigger home, for example. Now, if we are talking about indirect wealth, then it's just generally speaking valuables, and that can be anything. Yeah, it could be a valuable stamp collection. It could be a valuable jewelry collection or a valuable wine collection or whatever it is, the valuables, right? Whatever you consider valuable, right? So whether or not it's necessarily tied to monetary value, it's a different story. What you consider valuable, that's impacted by indirect wealth. Um, then more tangible, it also represents toys. It represents multi-purpose tools. So, if you're like, um, if you're using tools in your profession, expensive ones, yeah. So, maybe you're a business owner, you need to buy new tools, new machinery, for example. It could also represent expensive sort of tech equipment or computer equipment. And then also cryptocurrency is represented by indirect wealth. Yeah, so depending on what sort of interaction happens, it can either be taken away from you or it can be reduced or you are getting more of it. Yeah, with a combination, it's usually getting more of it or exchanging it into something more valuable. Now, next, we have the direct officer. Now, direct officer represents uh, anything that has to do with credentials, like diplomas, certifications, graduation certifications, or like a higher learning certification. All of these objects are represented by direct officer, anything that gives you more status. And it's like a license or something that shows on paper that that you've achieved a certain status or a certain position or a certain level of knowledge within your field. Now, if that's being clashed away, maybe a license is being taken away from you, like a business license, for example. But then also it represents any sort of handbooks and manuals, company handbooks, for example, manuals that you use for learning. So again, a clash could mean that company rules and regulations are completely being overhauled, for example. Yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be anything bad. It may be uncomfortable because suddenly you have to stick to new rules and regulations, but there may be an overhaul. Now, seven killings, on the other hand, um, the objects that are represented by the seven killings are windfall gains, unexpected gains, something that comes completely out of left field. Yeah, so maybe a lottery win, maybe you win a lawsuit. Um, maybe you make an inheritance, but it's something that is completely unexpected. It can also indicate or represent casino tokens, but again, that doesn't just mean that you win, that you have a big win. You may also lose those casino tokens when there's a clash, for example. So when it's a combination, it's usually something good, something added. When there's a clash or a destruction, it's usually something being taken away or reduced. Um, Now, seven kilix also represents alcohol, so spirits and alcohol. So you may do something stupid because you're getting drunk, and that leads to you losing money, for example. Or it can also indicate any sort of hazardous object. So hazardous object can be anything. It could be a sharp tool, could be drugs, could be weapons, anything that's hazardous. Yeah, so that's represented by seven killings. Now then we've got direct resource. Now direct resource represents because it's direct resource is a learning star, right? It's a learning 10 god. So any sort of reference materials and books are usually study material are usually represented by direct resource. Charts, graphics, diagrams, yeah, usually those are represented. Those are direct resource items and objects. But then also stationery, anything that you use in the process of learning and studying. Um, then on a more tangible level, vehicles, are considered direct resource. So any type of vehicle, not just cars, but also trains, airplanes, bicycles, motorbikes, and so on, and your clothes. Yeah, because direct resource has to do with comfort, or your basic needs, and clothing, and having a vehicle or being able to get from A to B is also considered direct resource. Now, indirect resource, on the other hand, has more to do with is still education, and still sort of like learning material, but it's more towards like scriptures, antique books, for example, antique texts, classics, and so on. Um, but then also it represents photographs, old paintings, these kind of things. It can also represent contracts and checks. So if you're still writing checks, indirect resource represents checks. Then we've got hurting officer. Now, the hurting officer, because it is like a very sort of like performative energy, anything that helps you perform in front of people is a hurting officer item or object. So whether that's a microphone or makeup that you need to put on before you get on stage, or branded clothing, or sort of like the stage that you are on, artwork, especially sort of like uh, artwork that really, really stands out. And then also anything that is really extravagant, something that people just look at and think, wow, what is this? Like very, very extravagant items and objects. And then anything that has to do with social media, sort of like viral posts, going viral on like any post that goes viral, or just social media posting, are also considered hurting officer items and objects, even though they're intangible. And then, of course, we've got the eating god. So the eating god, more in the background, still sort of like an artful god, obviously, but not quite as in your face as the hurting officer. And the eating god represents artistic works in general. So books, poems, songs, any type of artistic output. So even jewelry, for example, because that's somebody has to make that jewelry. So that's an artistic output, especially if it's your own. So any artistic output. But then also eating God, because it's got to do with enjoying life. So snacks in general, and sort of like fast food is also considered an eating God sort of object or item. And then we've got friend. The friend star, or the friend 10 God, represents um, sort of like tech tech equipment that connects you with other people. So your laptop, your smartphone, your tablet, these kind of things that connect you with other people, they are considered friend type objects. But then also objects that are made from natural materials. Yeah, so like organic materials, like organic clothing or leather clothing, for example, leather items. All the items that are made from um, natural products. Yeah. So whether that is fur, you may not agree with natural fur, having fur clothing, but fur in and of itself is a friend star item. Whatever you use the fur for is up to you, but it is a friend star item. Leather as well, but then again, also organic clothing, like if you make it hemp clothing or just linen, whatever. So anything natural. And then last but not least, we've got the Rob Wealth. Rob Wealth has to do with entertainment. Yeah. So it's just the star that goes out, entertains, also enjoys life. So anything, and event tickets would be considered a Rob Wealth item. But then also, if you go to a gym, the exercise equipment within the gym is also considered a rob wealth item or object, or even the exercise equipment you have at home. It could also refer to alcohol as well, so just as the seven killings. Because when you go out, when you party, when you have a good time with your friends, with your companions, you tend to drink alcohol. So alcohol is also represented by rob wealth. But then we also consider hardware and machinery a rob wealth object. So if you are a factory owner, like the hardware, the machinery you've got in your factory, that is also a rob wealth object, or those are rob wealth objects. All right. So those are the broad categories of objects and items that are represented by the 10 gods that can help you identify even further what may or may not happen when you have some sort of interaction happening with the year that you're going through, right? So if you have a pig in your natal chart, going through a snake year will affect certain aspects of your life, whether that's environment that we discussed last week or objects, yeah, depending on which 10 god is affected or associated with it in your natal chart. All right. So hopefully this helps you get a little bit more insight into the 10 gods. Most people just use them to, talk about or to think about professional roles and work styles and all of these things, but they do actually represent everything under the sun can be categorized into one of these 10 gods. All right. So as always, if you have any questions, comments, put them in the comment section below. If you would like to have a comprehensive reading of your chart, you can always contact me as well directly. My email address is in the description to the video. And please do give this video a like, share it with anybody who may be interested, and please subscribe to my channel. And I will see you in the next video. Take care, guys.